The Occoquan Radio Podcast is a private production and is not affiliated with the town of Occoquan. Opinions expressed on the podcast are solely those of its host and guests. Hello, everyone, and welcome to this episode of the Occoquan Radio Podcast. I'm your host, Ernie Porta, bringing you 10 to 15 minutes every week of irregular, unscheduled updates on things Occoquan and beyond. This week on the podcast, we'll talk about some past projects and events in Occoquan, discuss one of the oldest artifacts in the Millhouse Museum, solve a long-standing Occoquan nautical mystery, and close by reviewing upcoming activities in and around town. Make sure you don't miss an episode by searching for us on the podcasting app of your choice and hitting the subscribe button. Thank you for listening, and I hope you enjoy this episode of the Occoquan Radio Podcast. In town news this week, as I did a couple of weeks ago, in this episode I want to take a little time to review some past activities and improvements in town that took place a while ago and about which questions periodically arise. 2 weeks ago I mentioned some items from May and June of 2022. This week I'll mention some items from July and August of that same year. The major activity in July of that year involved our roadways. As many of you know, most of the streets in town are state-owned and maintained, and thus are on a general schedule requiring periodic milling and resurfacing by VDOT. One such major effort began in July of 2022 after VDOT had completed the repaving of Tanyard Hill Road, and involved major thoroughfares in town like Mill Street and Poplar Lane, Commerce Street, and parts of Washington, Union, and Ellicott Streets. Recognizing the potential inconvenience, VDOT exerted its best efforts to minimize the disruption to town residents and businesses, doing the work whenever possible between the evening hours of 9 p.m. and 5 a.m. Milling or removing some of the existing pavement was a critical part of the process for a variety of reasons. Among them is a desire to prevent pavement from growing increasingly higher than its surroundings. In fact, if you look at some historic photographs of select areas in town, you will see that some sidewalk or sidewalk-adjacent areas of town once stood above nearby pavement and now sit below it. After this milling and resurfacing activity, in August of 2022, the town dedicated 2 intersection projects designed to improve pedestrian safety. These projects were largely grant-funded and were coordinated by Prince William County. They included the installation of ADA ramps, new crosswalks, and some other items at the intersections of Mill Street with both Washington Street and with Ellicott Street. Occoquan District Supervisor Kenny Bodie supported the effort and spoke at the ribbon cuttings. Also in August of 2022, on the 13th specifically, we named the Occoquan Town Hall in honor of 2 late great long-serving Occoquan residents, June Randolph and Mamie L. Davis. The Town Council had adopted a resolution so naming the Town Hall way back in 1991, but Ms. Randolph adamantly insisted that no such naming take place while she was alive. After she passed away on May 23, 2022, at the age of 101, we made good on the long-delayed honor. I knew June personally before her passing. She moved to Occoquan in 1954 after serving in the FBI prior to World War II, and then during the war joined the U.S. Navy as a member of the then newly established WAVES, Women Accepted for Volunteer Emergency Service. During her time in Occoquan, June served as town clerk, town treasurer, town council member, member of the Architectural Review Board, member and chair of the Planning Commission, and town mayor. In 1989, the town declared April 15th June Randolph Day and made her honorary town sergeant, with the result that June had then served in every office existing in the town of Occoquan at that time. She was also a founding board member in 1969 of the Occoquan Historical Society, served as its first president, and played a major role in securing items for the Millhouse Museum collection. Her service as an Historical Society board member was continuous from its founding until just a few years before her passing. Among her many accomplishments on behalf of the town, June is widely considered to have been instrumental in Occoquan's rebirth into a popular commercial and tourist destination. In 1961, the town council created the Planning Commission, and June served as its first chair. It was a position she held for several decades, and one during which the Planning Commission drew up the town's zoning ordinances, which were ultimately amended to include the historic area zoning that resulted in the establishment of the Architectural Review Board. A late council member and fellow planning commissioner more than 30 years ago characterized June as the key person in producing a comprehensive plan for Occoquan that recognized a variety of development needs. As Occoquan transitioned into a new development period after the devastation wrought by Hurricane Agnes in 1972, a late mayor who served with her credited June's, quote, sense of fairness and diplomacy in helping reconcile, end quote, the differences among residents regarding how Occoquan should grow into the future. Two of the accomplishments of which June was most proud were the acquisition of the church on Mill Street in the 1960s for use as the town hall, and the creation in the late 1970s of Mamie Davis Park. For her many contributions, the town of Occoquan has chosen on a number of occasions to honor June. In addition to June Randolph Day in 1989, and to the town council wanting to name the town hall after June in 1991, at its gala celebration in 2009, June was one of several living World War II veterans of the town honored. Finally, in 2010, the town presented June with its Volunteer Award in recognition of a lifetime of service to Occoquan. Our Occoquan History segment this week comes from the Curator's Corner feature of the Occoquan Historical Society's June 2007 newsletter. In November of 1974, the Millhouse Museum acquired what may be its oldest artifact, a 31-inch iron ingot bearing the stamp Occoquan prominently on its face. The discovery of the ingot was the work of Mr. and Mrs. Clarence G. Blaisdell, who unearthed it that same year on their then recently purchased property in Falmouth, Virginia, a community on the north bank of the Rappahannock River, some 30 miles south of Occoquan. After contacting the Occoquan Historical Society members Jesse and Nellie Curtis about their find, the Blaisdells generously decided that the then newly opened Millhouse Museum was a fitting home for this piece of Occoquan's past. No one knows for certain how the ingot originally made its way to the Rappahannock, but iron manufacturing was one of the first and most prominent industries established along the Occoquan in the 18th century. In fact, it is from the ownership lineage of the iron manufacturing works founded on the river's banks that the town of Occoquan emerged. The Principio Company already had a successful iron operation in Maryland when it opened a furnace in 1727 along Occoquan Run, using ore supplied by George Washington's father. Its success predictably spawned imitators, and in 1738, John Tayloe of Richmond County opened a furnace on Neabsco Creek. When the Principio Company reallocated all of its operations back to Maryland in 1753, room emerged for another Virginia manufacturer to compete with the Tayloe operations. Charles Ewell had contemplated doing just that on the Occoquan as early as 1749, securing some nearby deposits of ore before abandoning the venture. In 1755, a relative, John Ballandine, acquired Ewell's ore interests. He obtained financing from the owners of the Neabsco operations, purchased existing riverine warehouses, and proceeded to erect, quote, certain forges, water grist mills, bolting mills, bakehouses, sawmills, storehouses, and dwellings, end quote, as well as his own residence along the Occoquan River. In doing so, Ballandine planted the seeds for today's town. The story of Ballandine's business difficulties and how they eventually led to the founding of Occoquan is well known. His partnership with the Neabsco operators ended in 1760. Strapped financially, he obtained a loan from John Semple of Charles County, Maryland, to whom he was eventually forced to turn over his entire interest in the Occoquan works a mere 5 years later. Semple operated the iron forge along the Occoquan for a short time, but as wheat farming developed in the area, soon turned his attention almost exclusively to the operations and trade associated with the two mills Ballandine had constructed. It was these mills that town founder Nathaniel Ellicott later purchased and operated. The ingot donated by the Blaisdells represents an intermediate stage in the processing of iron ore into usable metal. In a technique known as smelting, foundry workers of the time would have mixed charcoal, limestone, and iron ore in a blast furnace. The carbon in the charcoal served as the chemical agent that removed oxygen from the ore to reveal the underlying metal. Limestone eliminated additional impurities by separating the metal from rocky ore residue commonly referred to as slag. Traditionally, the resulting hot liquid metal was then poured directly from the blast furnace into a sand mold on the ground that consisted of a thin central channel with thick individual ingots branching off at right angles, like piglets suckling on a sow, thus the term pig iron. At this stage in the refining process, the iron ingot still has a carbon content of 3 to 4%, leaving it relatively brittle and of limited direct use. Typically, further refining removed additional impurities, and the pig iron was converted to more useful cast iron or steel. The donation of the pig iron ingot by the Blaisdells may justly be considered one of the most significant events in the history of the Occoquan Historical Society and the Millhouse Museum. Given the time frame in which the Occoquan works operated, the ingot likely dates from between 1755 and 1765, making it the oldest item in the museum's collection, save perhaps for American Indian arrow and axe heads. After donating the piece in 1974, the Blaisdells graciously completed the transaction by hosting a picnic and tour on their property. I encourage everyone who is interested in learning more about Occoquan history to visit Occoquan's Millhouse Museum and consider joining the Occoquan Historical Society. You can find more information at www.occoquanhistoricalsociety.org. That's the intro sound for our Rumor Mill Shredder segment. This is where we pay homage to the fact that while for much of its history Occoquan was a prosperous mill town, the only mill in operation today is the rumor mill. Here we take on urban legends, myths, rumors, or other similar topics that need straightening out. In this episode, we solve a long-standing nautical mystery involving the town. As some of you may be aware, the town had at least 2 shipyards during the 19th century, one run by the Hamill family and another by the Underwood family. These shipyards built boats ranging from some 30 feet to in excess of 80 feet. One such craft was a steamship named the Occoquan. An article from the newsletter of the Occoquan Historical Society from October of 2006 notes that the museum collection includes a logbook from the Occoquan that appears to suggest that the Occoquan was used initially as an excursion boat. Eventually, according to the article, it began carrying grain and lumber. It sunk in the Occoquan River in a storm in 1890, was refloated and repaired, and continued in operation until catching fire and burning in the Occoquan River in December of 1901, an end confirmed in newspaper accounts from the time. But, as the Historical Society article asks, quote, was the steamship Occoquan actually built in the town of Occoquan? End quote. The article notes that she was described as, quote, one of the pioneer flat-bottom steamers of the Potomac, end quote, the same design as the steamer Mary Washington, which was known to have been built in Occoquan shipyards. Additionally, the article mentions an 1869 report in the Alexandria Gazette that, quote, Hugh Hamill and Son were building a fine steamer designed for freighting on the Potomac, end quote, as well as other articles referring to the Underwood shipyards. Yet the Society newsletter article concludes that attributing the steamer Occoquan to the Occoquan shipyards was merely, quote, a safe conjecture, end quote. There simply was not definitive evidence. Until now. With ever more historical documents becoming available online, this particular mystery appears to be solved at last. First, the Saginaw Weekly Courier, from Saginaw, Michigan, of all places, reported on May 3, 1883, that, quote, Messrs. Underwood and Company are building a steamboat at Occoquan, Virginia, to run between that place and Alexandria, end quote. Almost 4 months later, on August 28, 1883, the Alexandria Affairs section of the National Republican, a paper out of the District of Columbia, reports that, quote, Captain William Turner of Occoquan Falls, with Oliver Underwood, have just finished a freight steamer, and had the same towed to this port yesterday for inspection and measurement by customs officers, end quote. Then, a little more than a week later, on September 6, 1883, The same paper reports, quote, "The new steamer Occoquan, which was built at that place and brought here to have her engine put in, was measured by the Customs House authorities and official number applied for." End quote. There we have it. The steamer Occoquan, according to the National Republican newspaper, was in fact built in Occoquan, apparently at the Underwood shipyards. Later articles tell us more about the vessel. One from the National Republican on September 10th, 1883, describes, quote, "The new freight steamer Occoquan, built by Captain Turner, measures gross 72.77 tons, net 43.30 tons." End quote. And finally, DC's Evening Star reported on September 18th, 1883, in its Alexandria Fair section, that, quote, "The steamer Occoquan, which has been taking in her boilers and machinery at the wharf here, is now entirely completed, and before the close of the week will be at work plying between the district cities, Alexandria, and the upper creeks of the Potomac." End quote. So there you go. Reasonable proof that the steamer Occoquan was, in fact, built here. One mystery solved. As always, we'll close by talking about upcoming events. First, I want to thank Dennis Vanderlask for arranging to have me speak on my book, Hurricane Agnes in Virginia, last week at Mary Washington University. And I also want to thank the folks at Prince William Green Business Council and Keep Prince William Beautiful for having me as their keynote speaker last week at their conference. I enjoyed both events immensely. In town this coming week, there will be a palette knife class on March 17th at the Loft Gallery, a flight of teas at Leaf and Petal on March 21st, and on the 22nd, a March into Spring plant party at Leaf and Moss, and a reunion party at the Vizia Art Gallery. Also, please keep in mind that the 10th Annual Prince William and Manassas History Symposium will take place this year on Saturday, March 22nd at the Manassas Museum from 8:30 to 4. I had the honor of being one of the presenters last year, and this year we'll be introducing a speaker whose talk is relevant to Occoquan, the Confederate cavalry raids into Prince William County in the winter of 1862. Last, there are some deadlines coming up that it's worth keeping in mind. Tuesday, April 8th will be the last day to sign up to make a diorama for the annual Peeps Show, and Monday, April 15th, is the last day to sign up for a booth for the Spring River Fest and Craft Show. For more information on some of these and other activities in Occoquan, go to www.visitoccoquanva.com/events. Again, that's www.visitoccoquanva.com/events. That brings us to the end of this episode of the Occoquan Radio Podcast. Make sure you don't miss an episode by searching for us on the podcasting app of your choice and hitting the subscribe button. I'm your host, Ernie Porta. Thank you for listening.